welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on economic sociology, in today's discussion we are going to understand the conception and definition of economic sociology. This is the part 3 of the series. In the first and the second part, we discussed about what is economic sociology, how it emerged, its historical relevance, and how Marx and Max Weber contributed to economic sociology. In today's lecture, we will basically discuss about Durkheim, Schumpeter, and Polanyi's contribution to economic sociology. So let us begin by understanding how Emil Durkheim contributed to the growth of economic sociology. Durkheim's attitude towards economics is a critique of utilitarianism, and utilitarian theory was a basic aspect of economic paradigm. So the most of economists began with a utilitarian theory that everything in the society would be economic if they have a utilitarian value. And this paradigm Durkheim criticized on 4 grounds. Firstly, utilitarianism is criticized for conceiving society as deriving from individuals, whereas society historically comes first. So, if we look to our previous discussions on Emil Durkheim's methodology, you will see that Emil Durkheim focused on the collective, and for him the society came before the individual. Now this is completely opposite of what the utilitarian argue. They give preference to the individual and individual choice. Second criticism, it is noted that exchange relations are seen as only based on the will of negotiating parties, whereas contracts have a normative foundation and cooperation has intrinsic morality. So again, Durkheim was more focused on normative pattern, on the morality. So much of how you kind of enter into a contract, how you negotiate your contract is not only economic, but it has a lot of morality, lot of norms connected to it. The third criticism is the role of the state, which is underestimated in the utilitarian theory, as it is limited to avoiding the infringement of rights, neglecting its broader role. Now, whenever we try to understand the connection between economy and society, it's very important to understand the role of the state, because state plays an important role in terms of negotiating this, bridging the gap between the economy and the society. The fourth criticism, it is argued that a society in which members pursue the self-interest is bound to disintegrate, as it does not allow the formation of durable bonds and identity. So the preference was to kind of give more to the collective, and that is why Durkheim in his elementary forms of religious life says that society is God. So we need to sacrifice our individual desires, our choice for the well-being of the collective, and that is where the collective consciousness becomes significant dimension of the society. This critique challenges the view that both the equilibrium of the market and social order are spontaneous outcome of profit maximizing activities of rational individuals. Durkheim argues, on the contrary, that exchange relations are not enough to guarantee integration, but other integrative mechanisms are needed. So, the society cannot function by pure rational economic exchange of, along with the exchange of material goods, there is a change of lot of other non-economic dimensions which are important for the integration of the society. Durkheim focuses on collective sentiments and representations that can influence individual action from outside and build shared identities and solidarities. Durkheim's explanation of how society functions emphasizes the social division of labor as a key factor. He argued that the social division of labor is not solely driven by the quest for increased productivity through role differentiation as suggested by classical economics. Durkheim attributed it to the growth of material and moral density of society, which is characterized by intensified exchanges and communication among individuals. This leads to a softened struggle for life, where individuals can coexist and cooperate due to their mutual dependence. And here, when he's trying to understand division of labor and integration of society, is where Durkheim comes in with the concept of mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity. And this is also in terms of evolution of society from a simple society, community based society, to a kind of a more individualistic and a kind of a complex society. So, what does he mean by mechanical solidarity? Was something which was found in pre-modern society, where the market was not so dominant, where the economy was kind of integral with the social. So, the household was the unit of production and consumption. So, the integration between the people were kind of a mechanical. Now, when we move to a modern industrial complex society, they are kind of increased interdependence and specialization. So, the industrial society is kind of based on specialization. So, you have various kind of specialists coming. Now, in order to say for the specialists to function, they have to be independent on each other, and that is what he is calling it as organic solidarity. Now, when we look into the contribution of Durkheim, which comes in with Marx and Weber as following into the classical thinkers, then we also have to look into how some of the more contemporary thinkers looked at economic sociology. And here we look into the contribution of Schumpeter. Schumpeter made a clear distinction between the object of economics and economic sociology. Yet, he integrated both economic and sociological analysis in his work. Now, when we look into Schumpeter and how his work is kind of different or kind of a continuation of the earlier classical thinker, we see that while Marx, Weber and Durkheim did not work within the tradition of classical political economy, Schumpeter mainly worked within that scheme. However, he did not attempt to replace a different general theory of social relation for economic theory. Instead, he used categories and theoretical construct from related disciplines, particularly economic sociology, to complement the economic core of his thought in various ways. And what are these ways in which he kind of integrates economic and sociological understanding? First is the model of entrepreneurship. Schumpeter's model of entrepreneurship and economic development. The concept of innovation that disrupts the static equilibrium of the society, leading to a new level of economic activity. Additionally, he emphasizes the revolutionary role of the entrepreneur, defining it not only in a functional term but also as a distinct personality and conduct that differs from the rational economic man. This approach integrates sociological, psychological, and historical perspective into economic analysis and thus provide a more comprehensive understanding of the economic phenomena. Now, when we look into the entrepreneurship as a model, Schumpeter discusses the role of the entrepreneur in a capitalist society. Now, the entrepreneurship is characterized by the need for innovation and the willingness to face criticism for deviating from traditional behavior. So, in simple word, who is an entrepreneur? Is one who is making an innovative difference, who is making an innovation. So, obviously, the innovation that he or she kind of constructs is new and would be in criticism from those who kind of go along with the conservative view. So, entrepreneurship developed within a specific historical context, and this historical context is capitalism, where it became distinct from earlier forms of leadership such as political or religious leadership. So, now the economic leadership in the label of entrepreneur is the kind of determining or the characteristic of the modern capitalist society. So, how is this entrepreneur or the political different from a ruler or a religious figure? So, unlike ruler or religious figure who guided societies in previous eras, entrepreneur emerged as a key driver of economic progress by introducing new ideas, products and business model. Now, as religious leaders tells us about the religion, to develop religion, to see it as progressive, so would a political leader want the development of his territory or the political domain. Entrepreneur is all interested in ensuring that new ideas are incorporated and to ensure that new products are constructed which would give more profit. So, entrepreneurship is basically emerging from the growth of capitalist society. It is giving the entrepreneurship a venue to progress more than the religious leader or political leaders. Entrepreneurs further fuel the dynamism of capitalism through innovations and competition. Their willingness to take risk, challenge existing structure and push boundaries is what propels economic growth and transformation. In this sense, entrepreneurship is not just about starting businesses but also about reshaping industries and driving towards progress in society. Entrepreneurial conduct has a complex nature as it blends both rational and emotional elements. Entrepreneurship involves rational processes such as forecasting, planning, and strategic decision making. It is not solely driven by utilitarian motives like short-term profit maximization. So, if we look into the classical political economist theory, in that the entrepreneur would be seen as someone who is only interested in profit maximization. But when we look into entrepreneurship from an economic sociologist's perspective, it has more than this utilitarian, because it's also about your leadership quality. It is also about your interaction with the other members. It is also in terms of your skills, in terms of your emotional intelligence, in terms of how you are able to negotiate your new idea and make a place for yourself. So, that is how we move beyond the rational utilitarian idea of an economic man. Entrepreneurship also stems from an intrinsic drive to create and achieve, which may extend beyond personal gain to ambitions such as establishing a lasting family legacy. The entrepreneur leverages rational tools such as money, science, and individual freedom while also operating within a broader framework that includes creativity and vision. Unlike traditional bourgeois culture, which often drives rationality in terms of short term financial calculation, the entrepreneur's rationality is more expansive. It moves beyond the material world, it moves beyond profit, it moves beyond the calculation. Entrepreneurship includes the ability to think innovatively, challenge existing norms, and act on original ideas, even if they do not yield immediate and material benefit. This interpretation of entrepreneurship aligns with economic theories of Joseph Schumpeter, who saw innovation as a disruptive force that drives economic progress. Schumpeter's perspective diverges from classical and neoclassical economists as well as scholars like Max Weber, Wilfredo Pareto, Werner Sombart, and Ferdinand Tönnies, who largely associated rationality in capitalism with utilitarianism, meaning actions are primarily guided by efficiency and economic self-interest. Instead, Schumpeter argues that entrepreneurial rationality includes both profit-seeking behavior and a deeper, more creative impulse that fuels long-term transformation in market and society. The second model of Schumpeter's theory of economic sociology is the theory of social class. So, the second way, it is basically a second way in which economics of sociology complements economic, and you need to apply a distinct sociological analysis to shed light on key aspect of economic theory. So, we need to kind of go back to the first few lecture on economic sociology, where the focus is to say that a sociologist would study the economic behavior from the social aspect. So, it is not necessary that economic behavior is only studied from an economic or a utilitarian dimension. So, this is what Schumpeter would keep in mind when he develops a theory of social class. In the case of Schumpeter's theory of social class that systemizes the insight on leadership present in the theory of economic development in a unique view of social stratification. Schumpeter's theory of social class presents a hierarchical arrangement of families where class membership is largely determined as birth and inherited status. So, there is a kind of inscribed status within the class understanding. However, social mobility both within a class and between different classes is not static. The key driver of mobility is the ability of a family to adapt to the demands of a given historical period. In other words, families that can adjust to shifting economic, technological, and social conditions and exhibit leadership qualities have a better chance of maintaining or improving their class position. This interpretation aligns with Schumpeter's broader theory of economic development, where leadership plays a crucial role. He argues that successful economic actors, particularly entrepreneurs, are those who can anticipate and respond to changing market conditions. Just as entrepreneurial success depends on innovation and the ability to break away from old patterns, class mobility also depends on adaptability and leadership. By framing class structure in this way, Schumpeter moves beyond deterministic view of social stratification, such as those found in Marxist theory, and instead emphasizes the dynamic nature of economic leadership. So, if you look into Marx's theory of stratification, it says that the modes of production will determine the social stratification. So, if you have private means of productions, your production is based on the private ownership of property, then the idea of creating conflicting classes becomes dependent or determined by the nature of the economy. Schumpeter is trying to focus that it is the leadership quality of the individual of a particular group who can have that capacity to move ahead or be upward mobile. His approach suggests that economic progress is just about capital accumulation, but also about the ability of individuals and family to respond to historical and social change. So, it is not that only people are engaged in economic activity of accumulating capital, but in that process, when you are engaged in any kind of economic activity, you are also kind of evolving to a particular historical context, and you have to be responsive, that is, you have to adapt to the changes that is taking place. And the more adaptability you show, the more leadership you show towards the transformation, your mobility would have a higher chance. He uses the analogy of hotels where different populations occupy the same space at different times to illustrate that while class structure may remain relatively stable, the individuals and family occupying those positions change gradually. Schumpeter examines historical examples such as the rise and decline of the German aristocracy and the phenomena of patrimonialism. These are the historical context which he is using to explain that mobility and stratification are dynamic, and it depends on the nature or the ability on the members of a family or society to respond to the corresponding historical changes. He argued that social classes are initially formed based on the ability to perform essential social functions that grant individual prestige and rank. For example, aristocrats historically derived their status from military leadership, land ownership, or governance role, which were crucial for society at that time. However, once a class is established, its status can persist even after its original social function has disappeared. This happens because social practice prestige develops a life of its own, independent of its original purpose. Wealth, influence, and deference from others continue to reinforce class distinction even if the individual in that class no longer performs the roles that originally granted them that status. Additionally, Schumpeter highlights the role of internal solidarity within elite group. Upper class maintain their dominance through strong social network, mutual support, and the inheritance of privilege across generation. This transmission of status ensure that leading families retain their influence even as broader economic and political conditions change. Overall, Schumpeter's perspective suggests that while social mobility is possible, entrenched elites often maintain their status long after their functional necessity has faded, reinforcing persistent inequalities within society. So, it kind of there is a continuity in terms of the dominance of a particular family, an aristocratic family, or a particular community, which is kind of happening parallelly. There are certain groups which have acquired a position, no longer doing the same function, but they have wealth, they have accumulated wealth, they have accumulated status, they have accumulated prestige, and therefore they retain that space. Others are trying to reach that space, and mobility is kind of taking place continuously. In capitalist society, the bourgeois is the leading class because they have performed the innovative and leadership functions in the economy. The bourgeois has a dual role in capitalist society. And what are these two roles? The dual role, its rise to dominance and eventually decline. The bourgeois, composed of business owners, entrepreneurs, and capitalists, become the leading class because of its ability to innovate and lead in economic affairs. Their success is based on the capacity to introduce new ideas, products, and business strategy, driving economic progress beyond just economic success. They also consolidate the status by accumulating wealth, power, social prestige, which they then pass to the future generation. Additionally, we see the bourgeois, such as the private property and the contractual agreement, they will gradually weaken because you have rose to a spoke, you have accumulated, but that accumulated will slowly and slowly decline or get reduced, and over a period of time, then the bourgeois will become weak in the economy. And there are other kind of provisions or economic political challenges that leads to the emergence of new elite, new groups which will come in order to replace the bourgeois. And therefore, we have the idea of the argument of theory of creative destruction given by Schumpeter, where capitalism constantly evolves, disrupting existing structure and replacing them with new ones. Just as bourgeois will get displaced, the aristocracy, new economic forces, new classes will form, and over a period of time, it will also come to a decline. So, Schumpeter's theory of class presents a distinctive perspective compared to other major theories of social stratification. So, we have discussed two important thinkers in understanding the contribution to economic sociology, that is Weber's collective consciousness and second Schumpeter's theory of entrepreneurship and theory of social class. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.